So welcome everyone to our session. This is the fourth in AFS Intercultural Programs International Education Week's sessions this week, and we'll have more tomorrow and Friday, which we'll share with you at the end of today. But today you have joined us for a really great session on bridging intercultural divides in a digitally super connected world. Hopefully you're in the right place. Today we are looking at the questions around, in a multicultural world interconnected by technology like never before, how can we foster understanding and empathy across cultures? How can we leverage the power of virtual exchange and other digital spaces to rediscover our humanity? And we'll be discussing the potential of digital platforms to bridge intercultural divides and create a more inclusive global community. We are going to today hear from three great panelists that I'm going to introduce in a moment here. Each will have an opportunity to address a question, and then we're going to give them a chance to address each other. In the meantime, though, we hope this is a very interactive session, by which I mean that you guys have access also to sharing questions in the chat. My colleague Linda can help monitor the chat for us, and we definitely will endeavor to have as much time as possible at the end of the session to take on as many of those questions as we can, because we definitely want folks here in the room to have a chance to have their voices heard as well. That is the plan for today. I am Ephraim Fisher. I'm the Chief Programs Officer at AFS Intercultural Programs, and I will serve as the facilitator for today. I want to briefly share the bios of our speakers so you guys know who they are, and then I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can have a better view of them, and we'll jump into the conversation. But we are joined today, first of all, by Stephanie Dasher, who is the Assistant Vice Provost for Curriculum Internationalization at the University of Minnesota. She's a contributing editor and co-author of the Guide to COIL Virtual Exchange and co-author of Making Global Learning Universal, Promoting Inclusion and Success for All. She hosted the Making Global Learning Universal podcast and serves on the advisory boards for AAC&U's Liberal Education and COIL Connect. Welcome, Stephanie. We have Andy Schaefer, who is the Assistant Director of Grants and Programs at the Stevens Initiative, where she oversees the initiative's grant making and program support. Andy has supported over 100 virtual exchange programs and brings a bird's eye view of the virtual exchange landscape to her work with partners. Andy also supports the evaluation of grant programs and helps practitioners build capacity to scale their programming. Andy previously worked with the Aspen Institute's Middle East program, where she focused on education, vocational training, and entrepreneurship in North Africa. Welcome, Andy. And then finally, we are joined by Jill Werner, who is a former classroom teacher, school administrator, and global learning specialist at the Indiana Department of Education. She joined AFS USA in August of 2019. In her role as the Senior Director of Education and Outreach to Schools, she supports educators and volunteers throughout the U.S. with increasing global readiness and intercultural competence in schools to cultivate active global citizens. She serves as a member of the board of directors for a variety of state, regional, and national organizations focused on building global competence and biliteracy among students and educators. So welcome, Jill, as well. All right, so like I said, will stop sharing my screen so we get a better view of folks. And I'd like to start with you, Stephanie. So to kick us off, why don't we start big? My question for you is, how have digital information technologies transformed the way we interact with people from across the world and from different cultures? Over to you.
Okay, that is a very big question. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to participate in this dialogue with these fantastic colleagues, or colleagues, as we like to call them in the field. I guess I would like to start off by saying something that might sound a little surprising, but for me, when it comes to connecting people across cultures, it's dialogue that is the technology, particularly collaborative dialogue, and it's digital information applications, productivity applications, communication applications, Zoom, Google Docs, extended reality. Those are the media that we use to bring people together who are geographically dispersed. to engage in collaborative dialogue. So in some ways, for me, from my perspective, not a lot has really changed with the advent of digital ICTs because we know about what it takes to design effective and productive dialogues amongst diverse peoples. We've been doing this for hundreds of years, thousands of years, from the Silk Road, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, interfaith dialogue, all the way up through Allport's intergroup contact theory, the work of so many interculturalists around today. We know how to design interactions, but it's digital ICTs that give us this new way, almost like a new clay, to shape the space and the ways that we bring people together. So, at first we people could only come together to engage in dialogue by foot. You could just walk as far as you can walk is as far as you can get to diverse people. And then we had horse and carts, and then we had trains and planes and automobiles, and then we had phones. And now we have this amazing magical Zoom, and we have virtual reality and extended reality to make this third space. But so we have to ask ourselves when we're thinking about using digital ICTs to facilitate intercultural interactions, which matters more, the technology, the digital ICT as technology, or the dialogue as technology? And I would say that now, in this age of all of these great digital apps that we have, we're faced with the same challenge, which is how do we design and facilitate the interactions amongst people? And I would say that, even in digitally enabled interactions, you don't even really need the fancy tools. Like I've been involved with Hoyles. Uh, One was really challenging because it was between students in Miami, students in Venezuela, and students in Ecuador. And the entire interaction over the course of 5 weeks took place on WhatsApp. The students never got to meet synchronously, face to face, the way we are now, to hear each other's voice in that way. But it had transformational impacts on the way that they saw themselves and the others and the world around them, their sense of themselves as global citizens. Some of these students said, I've studied international relations, but I've never gotten to, until right now in my senior year, a chance to work with international people. So it doesn't have to even be fancy technology. But if you do have the fancy technology, that's not going to make the the interaction really transformational. We still have to focus on design. We've had students rehearsing plays together using life-size projections with someone directing those students via Zoom, right? But it was still about the design of how the students interacted and dialogued with each other, the process of collaboration. We've had our Stevens Initiative grant where students are doing English and Arabic language and culture exchange in virtual reality. It's still the prompts, the dialogue prompts that matter most. So I would say that, yay, it is fabulous that we have these technologies that can bring people together that can't be together in person. But now, as always, it's about how we design the nature of those experiences.
Well, as a former social studies teacher, it warms my heart to hear a reference to the Silk Road. Um, didn't see that coming, but I think, the point is, what you're saying is this is not new to human history. In fact, this is how humans have interacted for thousands of years, and it's about the content and the design of this and how we structure it, not necessarily the technology. With that in mind, I will turn to Andy though and talk a little bit about the technology. So Andy, question for you: what are in your views the unique opportunities and challenges of virtual exchange and other online platforms for intercultural learning?
Yeah. I mean, how much time do you have? I could talk about this for an hour. No, but I will try to be brief, and before I do that, I just wanted to thank you, Ephraim, and the AFS team for having me and having us on this lovely panel. And thank you to all of our participants. I'm kind of following the chat, and we have a very global community here, which is lovely to see. And I think we're all looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions as well. Um, but maybe just to follow a little bit on what Stephanie was just talking about, um, just to kind of reemphasize what Stephanie said, what we at the Stevens Initiative are talking about when we're talking about this kind of like virtual exchange, intercultural exchange using technology, we are thinking about technology enabled collaboration and communication between young people. And a really important point that Stephanie just alluded to is the fact that it is kind of led and shepherded by humans. And it's not just people signing into a MOOC, for example, and listening, right? There are humans and there are people who are taking young people through this meaningful experience. That in and of itself is kind of a challenge and an opportunity. It requires a lot of investment. It requires a lot of buy-in and time to do that well, whether that's happening synchronously or asynchronously. But what you yield, and I'll talk a little bit about this in just a moment, is really meaningful outcomes and a really meaningful experience for young people who may not have the opportunity to go on an in-person exchange program, or who may not be able to do an in-person study abroad. Um, that said, though, I do also just want to say kind of upfront that we don't look at these kinds of virtual exchange programs as a like one-to-one comparison with study abroad, kind of traditional mobility programs. We see virtual exchange as its own thing that does have very similar outcomes in some areas to in-person exchange, but the enormous opportunity with all of this is scale and reach and accessibility. Because, like you said, Stephanie, we don't have to use a bespoke platform or really fancy technology. We can, and there are some really cool projects that are happening with really advanced technology, but we can also have a really meaningful experience on Zoom, on Canvas, on a learning management system that schools are using, on Google. But we also know that a challenge to some of this revolves around technology access. So yes, a lot more people can get on technology and have a virtual exchange experience than maybe those who might be going on a study abroad. But there are still a lot of people who do not have access to stable technology, or the technology needed for programs. So that's something that we as a field really need to, continue to try to advance. Similarly, there can be challenges sometimes with language barriers. Technology is really helping us overcome a lot of this with machine learning, AI, instant translation, and captioning. And there's a lot of, I think, very rapid advancement here. And the last kind of note that I'll say about challenges before I talk about opportunities is that integration can be a little bit of a challenge. And I'm really interested to hear what Jill has to say about this in just a moment. Integration into schools, districts, institutions of higher education has a lot of opportunity to advance learning goals and curricular goals, but it can also be kind of technically challenging, particularly when, I don't know, educators are overburdened, overwhelmed. This can feel like something that's additional on top of what they're doing. Um, and then to go back to that kind of meaningful human component that's needed to make these kinds of programs meaningful, that can feel like a lot. But all of these things can be overcome. And I know that Jill will kind of talk about the integration piece. On some of these other pieces, again, we are more connected than ever through digital technology, through social media, and yet young people continue to feel very isolated. These kinds of virtual exchange programs are a really wonderful way to meaningfully connect and be an active participant in digital technologies rather than a passive participant just absorbing, scrolling through TikTok and seeing what's going on in the world. That means that there's a lot of an opportunity for reach and scale as well. This can be incorporated into full classrooms. This can be open programs that adding one additional participant may not have much of an additional cost onto an organization in the way that an in-person program might. This can also be much more accessible for young people who may not be able to access in-person programs. And with technological advances like closed captioning, simultaneous translation, it's becoming increasingly accessible. The last thing that I'll say is that virtual exchange has a mutual benefit for everyone participating. Unlike, say, an in-person exchange, I'm going to Spain for the semester. I'm going to get a lot out of that experience being integrated into Spain. I don't know that a lot of people in Spain are going to get a lot out of my presence there. In a virtual exchange, everyone is getting something out of this experience. We are all meant to be on an equal playing field. This is not meant to be one group teaching another group or instructing another group. We're all here to get something out of this experience, even if it looks a little bit different on both sides of the exchange. So I'll maybe stop there. I can talk a little bit more on the impact side a little bit later, but I'd love to hear from some of our other panelists as well.
Great, thank you, Andy. There's a lot there, and we'll look forward to hearing more about the impact side. Definitely many people who are here today probably know AFS also as an exchange organization, and so what you're saying really resonates with us too. We certainly have debates within our own organization, people who are very wedded to the idea that, an exchange program is, in their minds, a much more impactful experience maybe than a virtual exchange or program. And I think the data shows pretty clearly that both are very impactful. Number one, we've also come to realize that this is a real pillar for us too. So again, while we might have a history of running exchange programs, certainly accelerated by COVID, we've seen how impactful virtual and digital programs can be as well, but also for all the reasons you're talking about, that scale, that accessibility, it's a real thing, right? And so we've had a bit of a revolution, let's say, even within our own organization, which is over 100 years old in recent years too. So thank you so much for that. You did mention, though, some of the challenges of integrating this into classrooms, which is a perfect segue to Jill. Jill, question for you. How can educational institutions integrate intercultural competence into their curricula and their programs?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ephraim, and everyone for sharing space and allowing me to be a part of this today. So I do kind of want to address the question, but I do have some thoughts that will relate to what Andy has prompted and so on and so forth. But coming from the K-12 space, especially from a U.S. context, when I look at this question, and I know the theme of this webinar specifically is related to, digital and virtual and bridging that divide, but I also have to look at it from a perspective similar to what Stephanie started with, where she was talking about dialogues. I look at this from, so much of education relates to relationships between students and teachers, relationships between teachers and teachers, students and students, communities, and those who are serving them in the educational space, and so on. And so, this idea of integrating intercultural competence comes from so many more angles from the human relationship perspective than simply technology. But technology has so much to offer to be able to forge relationships where they might not have been possible or thought of or accessible prior. So when I think about intercultural competence and integrating that into a curriculum or a program specifically, one of the things I hear a lot from educators is this idea that, but I have to teach blank, and you can fill in the blank with whatever topic you want. And they struggle a lot with the idea of this feels like an extra, something else they have to do. So how do you infuse intercultural competence into that classroom space when you have so many other balls in the air that you have to juggle? And so the first thing I would always say to them is this idea of modeling. As the adults in the room, kids take away so much from whoever is leading that classroom space, and they are watching. They are always watching. And so that idea of modeling intercultural communication, that respectfulness, that inclusiveness, establishing that inclusive classroom space is really a no-brainer when it comes to this integration of intercultural competence. If we want kids to be able to do it, we have to show them how as the adults in the space. And so it's building those spaces of inclusivity and respect. In order to do that, we have to make sure that the adults in the space have been given training or have had experiences that make them as the adults interculturally competent so that they have those skills. Otherwise, what they're modeling is the opposite of what we want kids to take away. And so that can be anything from having their own virtual exchange experiences, having opportunities just to connect and build relationships with individuals who are different than they are. It can be having their own personal experiences abroad. But even if they had those experiences when they were young, being able to continue those experiences in whatever format that takes, mobility, virtual, synchronous, asynchronous, no matter what form it takes, being able to continue the relationship building and the practice of intercultural competence for the adults in the space is critical. So that kind of takes me to the virtual space, which is making all of those experiences more accessible to the leaders of the space, whether these are the school administrators, the teachers, the leadership. I saw Stephanie nod there. The leadership is a critical component there to make sure that they are modeling for their teachers like they want their teachers to model for students. We have to engage all of them. And a lot of times from a time perspective, this is where digital and virtual really can be powerful, because it really does save time. It makes things more efficient when you have an asynchronous component, when you have a virtual avenue to bring people together where travel is not needed to accomplish a similar goal. So it allows for global cohorts and professional development for just a variety of perspectives to all talk about and engage in a similar concept and topic. So I could keep going, but I really think, kind of in alignment with what Andy and Stephanie both shared, is that, having worked with a few different types of virtual exchanges, I would say that the tool is not nearly as important as what it is about to do and the relationship building that it's going to bring about, so that the focus of whatever the project, whatever the initiative, whatever that professional development is, we remember that the focus is on the discussion, the dialogue, the relationship that's being built, and that whatever technology we're choosing to use in that fashion is one that feels equally accessible by the audiences on both sides, because it can, again, further divide people or illuminate privilege on one side that doesn't exist on the other when the technology that's being used is not as accessible to the audience on the other side. So I think that's where I'll pause, but I think there's a lot of things that the three of us will probably kind of tag onto as we keep going.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jill. So now we've had a couple of our panelists, stress this point that it's not in the end really about the technology per se, it's about the content still, right? And the facilitation and the modeling. I like that part a lot too, right? And of course, one has to be prepared to model appropriately, or else I like also how you said it, they will model the opposite of what they're trying to. So a couple things. So first of all, for those who are with us, please do use the question and answer function to put some questions in there. I saw an excellent question was just added there, and we'll definitely do our best to get to as many questions as possible, but please keep adding them. You can use the chat to, say where you're from or anything else, but sometimes the chat can get a little bit out of control fast and it's hard to keep up with. So the question and answer is a great space just to put those questions. And again, maybe better to put your questions there versus raising hands too. I see someone is raising a hand. So I want to open it up though first now to our panelists to either react to each other or ask each other questions. If there is silence, don't worry, I have questions for you. But let me first, just sort of open the floor to all three of you. Is there anything you want to pick up on that someone else said, either to ask a question or to build on? So please go ahead.
I'll jump in there. First of all, exactly, Andy, that about the integration piece, that this takes leadership. Yeah, leadership at all scales of our institutions, from our senior leaders, staff leaders, faculty as leaders in their classroom, even students as leaders. And Jill, you are really singing, you're singing my song. I come from secondary education as my background. And when I entered into higher education, it was somewhat stunning to me how little support faculty get in learning how to teach. And so it's stunning to our students sometimes. What? They're not taught how to teach? So, we discovered that if global learning is about connecting our students and our faculty and our staff and our leaders to the world's knowledge exchange and production network, our global learning is limited by the extent to which not only we are prepared to engage in that, but by the extent to which our peers around the world are able to participate. And we need professional development and coaching along those lines. And so, I'll just say that that's been part of my mission. It became part of my mission as a higher education leader, which is to serve our institution, to serve the institution that I'm embedded in. I also need to serve our community to make more global learning partners. And that's something that we're doing at the University of Minnesota right now too. And so I'll be happy to share some more information about that later too. But I know that Andy is doing that work and Jill is doing that work also. It's incredible.
I have a question as you were talking, Jill. Um, I have this hypothesis that these kinds of opportunities have such a versatile value proposition, which I think can be both a challenge and an opportunity. It can be a way to advance intercultural competence. It can be a way to advance social emotional learning. It can be a way to advance um, curricular and learning goals. And as we've talked about, the integration piece continues to be a little bit challenging. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about how to bring this to stakeholders in a way that it doesn't actually feel like an extra thing. I think everyone on this panel is like, this is so important, and it actually is a really meaningful way to achieve what you already want to achieve. But I don't know that we at the Stevens Initiative have really found that kind of unlock value proposition that resonates particularly in the education space. Like, do you have any reflections about that?
So having been doing this for a couple of years now, and it is such an interesting question because it depends on kind of the subject area or the goals of the teachers and or instructors, right? Depending on what level you are. What's been interesting is there are certain subject areas where this is an easy fit for them. It is already tied to the curriculum. It's already tied to the content that they're teaching or the way their standards have been written. Because in the United States, I know we have a lot of folks who are from other countries, so I want to make sure I address this piece. But in the United States, we don't operate with a national curriculum. We operate in a state by state basis, and what happens at each state level is every subject area is given a set of standards. And those standards indicate a list of skills and the kind of knowledge elements that students should walk away with at the end of each grade level or course. So with that being said, if we really want to make this not feel like an extra, first of all, the low-hanging fruit are those subjects where they're already expected to engage with or learn about other cultures, other languages, where this is simply a way to accomplish their standards, right? A virtual exchange or an engagement with individuals abroad in that context is already helping them do what they're supposed to do anyway. That's the low-hanging fruit. For the other areas, you have some folks, and they're scattered throughout, who believe in the power of global learning, and they're going to make it fit no matter what. No matter what their standards say, they're going to make it fit in because they get it. They understand that in their environmental science class, for example, the interconnectedness of the world is so powerful that if they are not bringing in the idea of global learning and intercultural competence to think about the human experience on the other side of the globe, or the implications of what that proposal is to solve a clean water issue on this side of the world, if we're not thinking about those implications, then we could be having a negative impact on other people. And so therefore, we have teachers out there that get it. They already see the power of that. Now, we also have a lot of educators out there that don't see that, and some of them are in leadership positions. And so I think probably the best way to accomplish this is to really look at what are the topics, what are the themes, what are the goals of each type of virtual exchange or virtual engagement that we're planning for. And if we can find curricular alignment with the theme or the goal of that virtual engagement, then it's easily married to the standards that subject area teacher has to teach. So for example, how do you get music teachers involved in this? Well, you've got to make sure that you're looking at the standards that they already have to accomplish and build a virtual exchange around that. And so on and so forth, right? You could do that with every subject area. But to your earlier point, when you were initially talking, I do want to address one of the things that came up kind of as a challenge. Because as we talk about the educational space, especially with minors, so this is in that, elementary, middle, secondary education space, one of the things I've seen is you have a lot of teachers who are all in. They're ready, they're excited, they get it, they've embraced it, they're ready to go, but then their schools get in their way. With privacy issues for minors, firewalls not allowing, access to certain technologies, videos, platforms to connect, etc. And then you also have a lack of time or training on behalf of the teachers who want to implement it to make sure that they reach a level of comfort that they're willing to put themselves out there and engage, because many educators that I know don't want to ever feel like they have failed or that they don't know how to do something. And so they want to, they tend to tiptoe in until they can feel really comfortable with the technology that's being used or with whatever the content or the process is. So they will drag their feet a lot for months at sometimes just to make sure they ask 50 questions, 100 questions to feel super comfortable before they will implement.
Andy, you teased us before with data and impact stories you were going to tell, so this is your moment, I think.
I will be super quick, but I can share just a little bit with the audience about some of the, very kind of like quantifiable data that we at the Stevens Initiative have seen through supporting virtual exchanges. And just a little context for this data. Um, our most kind of recent data came from a survey across 16 different virtual exchange programs this past spring. So this past spring academic semester. And these programs served different ages, all secondary all the way through post-secondary, different geographies, different age groups, focusing on different topics. But what we saw kind of across the board, just a couple of things that I can highlight for you all. First of all, and I don't think this is anything that will surprise you, virtual exchange opens doors to the world. 95% of participants reported that their program offered opportunities to engage with other cultures. And again, this is in a very active way and not a passive way for these youth. Virtual exchange creates a new generation of leaders, which I think we're so passionate about and so excited about. 77% of our participants said that they had more confidence in their ability to have an impact in their home country. Again, shifting this to being an active participant in society, in digital spaces, in communities. It's so important. And we also look at workforce readiness and preparing youth for an increasingly globalized workplace. So 89% of our participants reported increase in their job skills as a result of their, very diverse program participation. And 70% of participants reported new digital skills and competencies gained from virtual exchange programming. I saw that someone had posted a note in the Q&A about media literacy, which is wildly important. And these kinds of programs advance those skills. So I have a lot more data, but I feel like those were some nice little salient nuggets for you all.
Great. And then Jill, I'm wondering too, AFS is also a recipient of a Stevens Initiative grant. We are running a program called Global Up Americas, where we're doing virtual classroom exchanges between the United States, Mexico, and Colombia. And we'll, over the course of 2 years, have it had 3,000 students participating in these programs. So I'm curious, maybe, are there any stories or examples, Jill, you can highlight from that experience that I know you're in the midst of that either are instructive or heartwarming? We'll take either, but something that's worth sharing with the group.
Yeah, so I've just had a lot of comments from people in general that absolutely align with what Andy just shared, right? With the impact and the data that she just shared. Teachers who have gone through their professional development, they feel more comfortable and ready to lead their classrooms through this. The students feel empowered. They have shared testimonials here and there about their learning, about the fact that they were nervous to connect in the beginning, but by the end of their exchanges, they felt much more empowered. What has been a lot of fun is watching the development over the 6 to 8 weeks that the classrooms are engaged and seeing you know, seeing the teachers be nervous at the beginning and them just launching into huge celebrations by the end. I'm excited to see a video that should be coming my way here in the next few days from a teacher who just emailed us. She put together a whole ceremony for her students to kind of share graduation from their virtual exchange. So there's going to be photos and a video and what is being born out of that is she sent a message and said she and her partner have so much in common. They've become friends. And now they want to do a service project giving back to, you know, a potentially they want to help build a library. They want to do in-person events in their own local communities, build a library for kids in need to build more literacy around the world. And you can't predict that kind of stuff when you get started. These things, those are the stories, those are the things that come from relationships and just the natural trajectory of connections between people with similar interests and common goals, and technology and this virtual exchange to help us do that.
Very cool. Thank you, Jill. Well, at this point, we have 3 questions in the question and answers, and I see another one in the chat. So I'm going to read those 4 questions out loud, and then let's hear from the panelists, their impressions. In the question and answer, we have the first one is, in this era of digital super connection, would you say that a current key gap in the professional development of educators is the ability to facilitate cross-knowledge exchange? So I think that came up. Obviously to be able to foster meaningful interactions. Next question, I remember teaching during COVID, and that showed me the huge technological disparity in many spaces that still exists. How can we utilize virtual exchange and intercultural competencies to stop knowledge segregation rather than push it further? Then there was the comment about media literacy that I know someone picked up on already. Last question here, I'm under the impression that virtual exchange is led by US organizations and institutions. I facilitate virtual exchange dialogues and witness lack of representation from Europe and China in the room. Do you share this impression, and how can we incentivize the global component of virtual exchange? And the last question was in the chat. Hello, everyone. To the panelists, do you know about research of the impacts on students and faculty of programs such as COIL or virtual exchange? I'm curious about data that shows the effective attainment of global competencies, for example, which I think we've addressed a little bit, but we can go further. So maybe, Stephanie, I'll start with you. 4 questions. I don't think you have to answer all 4, but you can choose where you'd like to pick up. Let's endeavor to answer all 4 if we can, but I think it's always good to take a few questions, and then you can, sort of decide where you want to jump in.
Well, yeah, I mean, the most COIL and virtual exchange I think that's happening in the world really is really coming out of Latin America. There's huge uptake, and very, very quickly when the pandemic began was in Latin America. So that's just one quick thing. But getting back to the professional development piece and the connection really there does have to do with the work that I was engaged in at the beginning of COVID, when this tsunami of interest worldwide in virtual exchange happened, working with our partners in Latin America and thinking about, number one, COIL and virtual exchange and the relationship between faculty as one of a comparative global learning experience for them, right? The opportunity to find someone with whom you may have more in common in terms of your interests in another part of the world, but who is embedded in a very different educational context, is a huge learning experience, a global learning experience for faculty, for teachers, along with their students. And that professional development, the opportunity with COIL Virtual Exchange, is that the professional development that faculty experience is indeed experiential, right? So when we're leading our workshops with faculty partners, where their COIL project is the design of their coil, and they are experiencing what their students will experience. We hear from them, wow. I have a completely different empathetic understanding of my students' learning experience. And number two, what I'm learning in this workshop about creating a learning community with diverse perspectives in the room, about how to design true equitable collaboration, and how to engage my students in authentic assessment of their learning and connection to community. All of that can be done in all of my classes, not just my coiled classes, not just the classes with which we do virtual exchange. So this is just good teaching and learning that allows me as a professor to do what Jill was saying, to feel more comfortable in my classroom, to feel more agile and creative, and even to bring my research and my community engagement, my service inclinations and passions into the teaching space. So it's such a fertile space for faculty learning as much as it is for student learning.
Good. Well, it makes me feel good too about our focus at AFS on educators, in addition to the participants of our programs, and also to equipping people with the skills to be qualified facilitators as well. Yeah, I think I'm also noticing too, someone followed up on the comment around, where is this happening, to also note that that was a question and a challenge they were facing. So you mentioned Latin America. I can certainly say that within our AFS global network, our partners in Latin America are quite active in the virtual space as well. And if anyone is, looking also to engage with China, AFS China is also one of our most active organizations when it comes to virtual exchange as well. So feel free to reach out to us if that's a specific need or desire that you have in terms of connection. Andy, of course, also the Stevens Initiative is connecting, not U.S. youth around the world, but including to the Middle East. So I think that's another region where you can speak to. But why don't I open it up to you, Andy, now, if you can either address that question, or of course you can address other questions that were asked as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll also just add really quickly onto what Stephanie was just talking about in response to Rodolfo's question. I do just want to emphasize again that these kinds of activities and interventions really do require intentionality, and setting up a Zoom between two classrooms and, Michigan and Mexico, and then just, letting the comments fly or letting the students do whatever they want is not going to make for a successful intercultural exchange or experience. And so it really does require a lot of intentionality around um, a meaningful facilitation of that cross-cultural exchange, of that dialogue, of that collaboration. And again, that may be happening synchronously, or it may also be happening synchronously. That standard applies in all situations, even if, just to use a classroom as an example, the teacher may not be, looking at every chat literally as it's happening. There's still a lot that one can do around just kind of intentional facilitation of dialogue, collaboration, and also accommodating different communication styles and needs among participants, which is really important when there are language differences between participating students, classrooms, countries. So those are really important factors to also take in mind. Um, and then, okay, so the other question was talking about, was this a geography, like talking about virtual exchange
Yeah,
abroad? I'm so
there's
sorry.
been a question about like whether virtual exchange is very like US centered, and
Yeah.
that was one thing. But there are some other big questions here that we haven't touched. For example, talking about sort of someone wrote, how can we utilize virtual exchange and intercultural competencies to stop knowledge segregation rather than pushing it further? That was one that we haven't had a chance, and a couple of people have chimed in response to. So again, we have about 5 minutes left. We're not going to address everything in the universe, but you can take your answers any way you want, Andy, and then I want to give Jill a chance as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll just talk really quickly on the intercultural competencies and knowledge segregation, because I think that's really important. This can be a great opportunity to open up learning in a very equal way between two different places, institutions, communities. So we have seen programs, for example, that are bringing together disparate groups to do a comparative study on the business climate in Morocco and in the United States, just as one example. And for each different community to help the other community work on an implementation of a project that supports their community. So the Americans are helping the Moroccans implement a project, and the Moroccans are helping the Americans implement a project. I think this goes back to that notion of mutual benefit, that even if the experience isn't perfectly identical, that everyone is getting something out of this experience and no one is feeling othered or like they are being meant to instruct or mentor or teach another group. This is usually in an international context, so a lot of what we at the Stevens Initiative are looking at is people in the United States and elsewhere, primarily focused on both the Middle East and North Africa and Latin America. But I think it's such a tremendous opportunity with virtual exchange. And in doing so, a lot of our outcomes do center on intercultural competencies, on cultural knowledge, on understanding other people's perspectives, on empathy. So these are all, really meaningful outcomes of virtual exchange.
Thank you. I'll turn over. Oh, Stephanie, looks like you want to mute yourself. You want to say something quickly?
There's a very salient, a very important question regarding academic freedom and freedom of thought and endangerment of that in different parts of the world. And I just it's a hard thing to say because we don't like to think of ourselves this way with the positionality in the US, which for so long has been a leader in the idea of freedom of speech and academic freedom and protections around academic freedom with tenure. It's not news to anyone that in the US we are struggling with these issues as well. We are struggling with these issues state to state. There are state legislatures that have made edicts that state institutions of higher education are not allowed to collaborate with certain countries, and among those are China and Russia and Venezuela. And but we are all warriors for the human spirit in this space, right? That's why we're here. We believe in connecting under all circumstances. And within our spheres of influence, no matter how small we may think they are, we must exert the power that we have available to us with the circumstances and the situation that we have to connect people that would not connect or know each other existed, much less that they have similarities, were it not for the efforts that we make to connect them. So I would just say to our colleague who posed the question, it's a really big question. It's a global question. It's an international question, and it is going to feel increasingly difficult to do this work and scary. And yet we all do have a sphere of influence, and we can all find someone with whom we can connect that our students would not have connected otherwise. And in so doing, we will be doing the good work.
That's great, Stephanie. Thank you. Jill, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on the questions again, or to respond to what you've heard, but over to you.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna, I think, kind of bring it back to where we started as a summary of some of the questions that came up, which is both related to the facilitation question, because I agree that that is a critical component of making sure whoever is leading an exchange or a virtual interaction, synchronous or asynchronous, doesn't matter the format, but they need to have been trained and have a skill set to build bridges and help people build relationships. If you've ever seen a movie based in the United States where there are middle schoolers at a dance, you can put all of these children in the same gymnasium and they're still going to be separated, right? It takes that powerful personality to come in and help, you know, bring those two groups together and get them dancing and collaborating and commingling on the dance floor. And a virtual exchange and a digital collaboration is no different. You have to have someone who's a connector, a builder, a relationship, you know, person to be able to bring all of the participants together. And then just as a little piece from a modeling perspective, because this is something I said in the very beginning, you know, at AFS USA, we've had the opportunity to do some virtual teacher training together with our partner at AFS China. And one of the things after we did it once, it was very apparent that we messed up and we needed to change it in the future, which was you've got to have facilitators that are representing both audiences so that there is not an emphasis on one language or the other language to other one group or the other. So we learned by doing, which proud to say we've rectified that and it's gone very well since. But modeling, relationship building, preparation and training are all critical elements to really bridging that divide and bringing success using virtual exchange and embedding that intercultural piece into the learning at any level.
Well, thank you guys so much. I can see from the participants that we have held everyone's attention for the full hour because the numbers have been the same throughout, which is great. This has been really excellent. We've covered everything from the Silk Road to a middle school dance and everything in between, at least what one can do in an hour. I want to thank the panelists so much for your expertise and your comments. I'm going to share my screen too, and I don't know when it will show up, but do you guys see my screen with the feed with the form to fill out? Okay. So we do love feedback at AFS. We have been offering a number of these sessions at International Education Week for a few years going. It's great for us to get your feedback on what we can do better or what it is that people may want to hear. So please take a moment. You can either use the QR code right now on your screen, or if you're really good at typing, you can type in a link, but it's also going to come to you in an email that you're going to get as a follow-up to this session. So if you can't capture it right now, don't worry, but please take a moment and try to give us some feedback if you can. Good news too, exciting. You will be receiving a digital badge actually as well for participating in this session. Again, there'll be some instructions that you'll get via email, which will tell you how you can upload that and share it. We talked in the chat, it seems like, about being connectors in chief. So please show off that you were a part of this and that you are a connector in chief by having attended this and heard from our panelists. And as noted at the beginning too, it keeps going. So there are 3 sessions that AFS will be offering tomorrow at 8 o'clock, 11:30, and 2 o'clock. These are all Eastern Standard Time. So please check those out. I guess we're taking Thursday off, but on Friday we're back. And we'll be looking at global families, insights from the host family experience. So especially for those folks who work in the international exchange field, I think that'll be super interesting. Other than that, once again, thank you guys for being here. Everyone who's here, you'll get your badge, you'll get a link to the recording, and you'll be able to watch this again tonight, tomorrow, as many times as you want. But it's been really wonderful to hear from our panelists. We really appreciate your time. And again, we thank everyone for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you.